Okay, guys, let's continue. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Patrícia Spinelli. Patrícia finished her bachelor degree in physics at Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, and also she got this master in physics there as well, no? And after that, she spent a few years in Europe, where she got her PhD in astrophysics at the Ludwig Maximilian University, no? So since then, Patrícia came back to Brazil, and she had like a postdoc experience at Universidade de São Paulo, and then after 2012, I think, more or less, 13, she has this permanent position at the MAST, where she works with lots of interest subjects related to outreach and science dissemination, and she's going to talk a little bit about that. And also, Patrícia and I, we coordinate in Brazil this PILOAD, the Portuguese Language Office of Astronomy for Development, that belongs to the International Astronomical Union. So she's also, we are collaborators in some sense. So thank you so much, Patrícia, to accept the invitation to come here and talk about this very important subject, especially because here we have lots of undergrad students and grad students, and we all understand that we need to talk more about outreach and about the value of science. So it's really important, and I hope, guys, that you enjoy this talk.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, the organizers, for the invitation. So it's really a great pleasure to speak in a school about public understanding of science. This is not very typical, not very common, but I think we need to talk about this. And I think my perspective here today is to bring you some insights from the field of science communication, not only as a practitioner, but also as an academic field. So Karin gave this title for my talk. So science outreach, what is and what is not. I don't know if I'm going to tell you what it is, because it's still under construction, but let's try to define some words that are necessary for this, for us as practitioners or academics. So, as Alan already introduced me, I did my whole studies within the physics department. So I'm a physicist. I did my master's and my PhD on astrophysics. I got my PhD in astrophysics by the International Max Planck Research School in Germany. And I did a short postdoc at University of São Paulo. And when I was doing my PhD, I started to engage in science education. So I think there it was when I started doing like more systematically science outreach. And then in 2013, I became a staff researcher on science and technology at the Museum of Astronomy and Related Sciences. And I'm based at the Science Education Department. And nowadays, I'm a professor in the Master in Science and Communication at Fiocruz. So, but why I'm saying all this? I'm saying all this because when we are talking about public engagement of science, with science, we have to remember that we are dealing with people, and people are not atoms. So, besides of being all this, I'm also from South Brazil. I'm Gaúcha. I'm married. I'm the dog owner of Polenta. This is my dog. It's an Italian greyhound. She runs almost at speed of light. She's really, really fast. I like yoga, I like traveling, I like nature, the beach. I actually got married at the beach because I love the beach. I like reading, I like relaxing. And I have a passion for astronomy communication. So that's me, I'm a person. I'm not only a scientist, but I'm also a person. And among the activities I like to do the best, there is the Galileo Mobile. This was actually the first project I got engaged 10 years ago. I also run a project at the museum called Girls in the Museum. There is someone in this picture that is currently here, and I'm very happy and proud. Milena is here. She used to be a girl in the museum 2 years ago, and now she's a Valongo student. And there is also Behold the Sky project that we lend equipment for teachers to use at their school. So I really enjoy working with teenagers and teachers. There are many people that don't like to work with teenagers, but I enjoy a lot. So I think these are my beloved outreach activities. But this, besides that, I also work as a researcher on the field. So now I want to know about you. Of course, you are probably all, are you all studying astronomy, or are you studying physics? What else? There is someone. Chemistry. So are you undergrad students or grad students? Who is undergrad student? And grad student? Okay. So are you all Brazilians? All Brazilians, yes? And I'm speaking. No? Brazilian, yes? Okay. And who here is engaged with science outreach? Okay, many people. And who has worked in a museum or planetarium? Okay, Milena as well, sort of. And who has ever participated in amateur astronomy clubs? Okay, good, good. Okay, so now I know a little bit more about you. Okay, and now I go to my talk. It's good for me to understand what are your interests, and if what I'm saying is familiar to you, or if I have to explain more. So this is the outline of my talk. I'll try to keep this title, Science Outreach, but sometimes I will say Science Communication, and I will explain why. But first, I just would like to say some words about the museum where I work. Then I'll go through some definitions. Then I'm going to introduce you the field of science communication. Then I would like to tell you a bit how the International Astronomical Union is organized for this kind of activities, some challenges and opportunities, and some final remarks. So if you have questions, you can ask me, okay? You don't need to leave the questions to the end. You can ask me anytime you want. So the museum. I'm going to introduce the museum because we are in Rio and the museum is in Rio. So if you're not from Rio, maybe if you have some time, you should definitely visit the museum. Because the museum was originally the home for the National Observatory. Now it's another institution. It doesn't belong to the National Observatory. It's another institution. But it still shares the campus with the National Observatory, and is also a research institution from the Ministry of Brazilian Ministry of Science and Technology. But the research we conduct, the fields are history of science, museum studies, science education in non-formal settings. And it's in São Cristóvão neighborhood. So here there are some pictures. We are in this very beautiful building that used to be the National Observatory. And within the building we have exhibitions about not only about astronomy, but astronomy and related sciences, because the collection of objects we have are not only astronomical objects and instruments. There are some geophysics and even chemistry objects. And we also safeguard the antique domes of the National Observatory. So within these domes, we have beautiful refractors. And there is one refractor within this dome, the 21 centimeter telescope that we still use for public observation of the sky. But besides of the exhibitions and the collections, we do lots of activities with the visitors. So experiments, talks, cine clubs, night sky observation, among many others. And of course, we use the objects of our collection with the public. So now a parenthesis. So you might be aware that next week we are going to celebrate 100 years of the general relativity confirmation. So the ephemeris is on the 29th of May. And Brazil actually played a very, very important role on the experiments, because Eddington was the scientist involved in the experiments, in the observation of the eclipse. And there were two expeditions led by Eddington. One went to the island of Príncipe in Africa, and another one went to Sobral, where the total eclipse would be visible. So, 100 years ago, the National Observatory organized the expedition, all the logistic parts to receive the British expedition, but also the National Observatory also undertook experiments and observed the solar corona. The astronomers of the National Observatory also had similar instruments as the British. And all these collections of experiments, they are at the museum, and we are going to exhibit, we are going to occupy a whole pavement for the exhibition. So we are going to talk about general relativity, but also the science that Brazil was doing 100 years ago. So if you want to come, the exhibition will be open on next Wednesday. And besides that, we are also going to launch a commemoration medal. This was done in collaboration with the Mind of Brazil. So if you want a special gift from these ephemeris, on 1st of June we are going to cast the commemoration medal as well. Okay, so now we go to science outreach. Well, what comes to mind when we talk about science outreach? What do you have in mind? I put some figures here, but I want to hear from you. What do you have in mind? Carl Sagan, great. Non-scientists, the lay public. Faraday. So if you Google science outreach, then you'll see many images. So for instance, there is this book, there are games, lectures. Lectures are a very common, a very frequent way of doing science outreach. So this is a drawing of Faraday, and he was a science communicator. This is the Christmas lectures. This is 1825, when he was giving the lectures about electricity. It can be also the star parties, the observation of the sky. And if we keep going, there are magazines, there is Cosmos, and there are also the press release when there is a big discovery. So there are many forms of doing science outreach. And if you think a little bit, you'll see that there are many different skills involved in these different deliverables, right? Because to write a book about astronomy, I need maybe very good writing skills. But if I go and I give a talk, then maybe it's going to be really nice if I'm also an entertainment person. Because if I'm boring, maybe no one is going to hear my talk. So it's really important, you know, if I have to speak in front of a camera, so you also have you need to have other skills. So there are many things that can be considered as a science outreach. But then let's go to some definitions. And now it's important to tell you guys that this is a new field of knowledge, so it's under construction. And sometimes some definitions in English there is one form of wording, and in Portuguese there are different ones. So this, because as I was saying, it's not, all the definitions are definitions by humans. It's not like empirical laws of nature that they are universal, right? So let's first go through formal education. When we are considering formal education, we are considering the education that we have at schools, at universities. The formal education happens in very specific places and institutions. And normally, when we go through this system, scholar system or university, there are levels. I cannot jump the level. I have to complete school curriculum. I am evaluated. I have to pass, and then I go to the next level. So it's really rigid, okay? The teachers cannot teach whatever they want. There are like specific contents to teach, and there are evaluations, and there are levels. So this is the formal education. The formal education, it's normally, when we are talking about the learning process, we have to remember the teaching and also the learning process. But we learn in many places, not only at schools and university. So we can also define non-formal education. So there are many non-formal education spaces that we can go and learn. For instance, within the museums, in the forest, in the planetarium, within the planetarium, or even in the cinema. I can go to the cinema and watch documentary, and then I gain knowledge. So there are other places that we can promote education, but it's not very restricted to the school curriculum. There are no evaluations, and we are still learning. And then there is the informal education, because we learn all the time. I don't need to go to the museum to learn something. I can simply go through the internet and watch a video on YouTube. Or I can talk to my parents, to my friends, and they can tell me things that I don't know. And then I will also gain knowledge. And now there is what I wanted to tell you about the wording. So these typologies of education, we use this wording in Portuguese and Spanish, like as I told you. However, in English, very frequently, you will see segregation between formal education and informal education. So in the literature, normally when you read about informal education, you'll get information about education in museums, in science centers, planetarium, cinema, but also the learning that you can gain yourself by Googling or using the internet. But in Portuguese and Spanish, normally we split, we differentiate non-formal education and informal education. In many places, you will also see the word EPO, that is Education and Public Outreach. So normally the EPO, there are many institutions that they have EPO offices, and normally this is the place where they will, the department or an office, that will write the press release about the science that is done in the institution, or even prepare education material related to the science that is done. So education and public outreach. But then what is science outreach? Perhaps the best definition we can use to define all these activities that sciences do with the society. In Portuguese, we use the word divulgação da ciência, divulgação científica. So this word doesn't exist in English, and it's not actually translated to outreach. So this is a problem. So divulgação da ciência and outreach are not the same. The translation doesn't match. So the best word that we can use, I think, to compare in Portuguese to English is probably science communication, okay? But not only. you'll see sometimes in the literature science communication, or popularization of science, or public engagement with science, or public understanding of science, or responsible research. So all these words appear in the literature, and outreach normally it directly matches with extensão that we use in Portuguese. But is extensão or outreach activities that we do to communicate science? Not necessarily. Actually, including UFRJ, oftentimes when scientists write science communication projects to extensão, they do not get the grants because they understand as extensão or outreach as a totally different thing. Sometimes a service that the department will offer to society that not necessarily is the communication of science. So that's why I'm trying to explain this to you, right? So divulgação da ciência is not extensão. That's what I want to tell you. And in English, it best translates to science communication. So in Spanish, it's very similar, the wording, because the word divulgación also exists. And it means the same. So science communication, from now on, I'm not going to talk about science outreach anymore because of the wording. Now I'm going to talk about science communication as a research field, okay? And science communication referring to all the actions we can do to communicate the science we do with the public, right? And it can happen in schools, within the formal education system as well. So, so it's a very new field of knowledge. So there was, in the last decades, there was an international wave of concern about the relationship between science, technology, and society. And there has been an increasing number of people involved in science communication, right? So it used to be like this in the past. Maybe the professors here know very well that when we were undergrad students, oftentimes the professors, they didn't want us to engage with science education and communication. But recently, this movement it's a growing movement, and oftentimes forced by public policies, right? So it doesn't come out of nothing. I mean, there is something pressuring us to engage with science communication. So since there was a growing investment in the area, there were many public publications, events, new museums and science centers in Brazil. Actually, the last 16 years, there were many calls from CNPq for museums and science centers and planetariums. Okay, so we are also forced by public policies. And therefore, we have to evaluate what we are doing, of course, right? Because we can't say that we are spending all this money and we don't know if this is worth or not. So science communication has emerged as a field. So there are many actors and there are many discussions, right? For instance, who should communicate science? The scientists? The journalists? Educators, like people that work in museums? Consultants, people that they have like these very nice and fancy companies with new technologies, that they do like amazing things, but sometimes it slips a bit on the content. So who should do? But actually, it doesn't matter what we think. All these actors, they play an important role in science communication. So the tools, as I mentioned before, there are many tools. We can do talks, we can do education activities, write books, we can use various medias, internet, we can build science and science centers. Or as a researcher, you can research all this, but then you have to be aware that you are going to use methodologies from the social sciences, because we are dealing with people. So to work in the field of science communication, you can act as a practitioner, or you can act as a researcher. So since there are so many words and so many definitions, and is still a field that is still, there are many reflections in the fields and on the definitions, my advice is that you get one definition and stick to that definition and understand the definition. So I like this one from Burns et al. From 2003 that says the following. Science communication is defined as the use of appropriate skills, media, activities, and dialogue to produce one or more of the following personal response to science: awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and understanding. So now I'd like you to realize this, that in any moment it's saying teaching. Right? And this, I think, is one of the messages I would like you to take home. It's very unlikely that in 1 hour or 2 that we get in touch with the public, that we will actually teach something to someone. And this is even a matter of debate, right? There are many critics of science communication say that it's impossible to communicate the science we do. Because if I have to simplify so much the words to explain to people, then I'm not explaining the science what I do. So the person will never understand what I do, right? But okay, so these are all debates that that are among the people that are working this in the field. But to me, actually, what it matters is the following: is the change of attitude towards science, because it's and now maybe what I'm going to say, it's very contemporary. To me, what is important is that people understand how we acquire knowledge, right? That when we acquire knowledge in science, it's not a matter of opinion. We are acquiring knowledge through observation, through experimentation. However, if a colleague in another place of the world falsify my theory or my discovery, it's okay. It is okay, because this is how science works, right? This is how science works. So I think this is the most difficult to people, because one day people wake up and coffee is good for health, and the other day coffee is not good for health. And the next day, the problem is with the egg. And the other day, the egg is good. So I think this is difficult, and this is why many people they don't believe, they use this word, I don't believe in science, right? Because this is difficult. So to me, it's very important that people can acquire this skill, that we are gaining knowledge. Of course, we are gaining knowledge. It's not mere opinions. But this can change, because discoveries make us to rethink the knowledge that we are getting. Okay, so in Brazil, CNPq, so our National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, also recognizes divulgação científica, or science communication, as not as a field, but as an area of a broader field. So, here there is another definition that is by Bourdieu, how we define field of research and area of research. Actually, area is within the field, so the field is broader, right? So, divulgação científica, or science communication, is an area within social sciences. right? Social and humanistic sciences. So this means that we can also apply for grants. There are calls. There is an academic council that can evaluate projects, give you money to present your science communication project in conferences, and so on and so on. So as we have for astrophysics, physics, and other, there is also money for this, for this in Brazil. And this is quite recent. And for the practitioners, you might be aware that in Lattes, you can also put the activities that you are developing. And this is also quite recent, I think. I think this is like from what, 5 years ago, maybe? It's less than 10 years ago that we can put on the CV, right? Yeah. Okay. So, if we are talking about science communications, then it's better that we know how to communicate, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the communication models by Bruce Levenstein. He tried to categorize the ways we communicate science, but of course there are other categories, right? This is the most used. And let's first go to the deficit model. Then I'm using some slides from a colleague, Carla Almeida from Fiocruz, because she's a scientist from science communication. She's a journalist, so I took these slides from her. So the deficit model, how does it work? This is the most common, model of communication. I am invited to give a lecture in a school. I go to the school. I will tell everything about gravitational lensing, and I don't care who they are, how old they are. I don't know anything about them, and I'm going to talk all the time because, of course, they don't know what gravitational lensing is, right? So this is the deficit model actually has this name because it's based on a research that was done in the 70s in the US, where they were trying to see the literacy, the science literacy of Americans. And well, it was a disaster. Like only 5% of people could understand DNA, and then, of course, the conclusion was that people don't know. So there is a deficit. So we have to tell people what they should know about science. We scientists decide this, and then we tell people, and because they don't know anything, they are empty containers. So, and this is the most typical, right? And if you are engaged with science, communication, don't do that. It's difficult. It's very difficult to do differently, but try not to do that, right? Okay, so the problem is the public. Of course, they don't know. We know. So people have a serious lack of knowledge about the basics of science, and since people don't know anything about science, they should know. So the scientist is the holder of knowledge and has the task of transmitting all the knowledge to the lay public. So of course, there are many criticisms on that. It's unidirectional, monological, and there is a hierarchical form of communication. And of course, it ignores totally the public if the public wants to know what gravitational lensing is. It doesn't matter. I think it's important, and the public has to hear what I think it is important. Okay, so could you hear that? So if you are invited to give a talk, how can we avoid? I already translated. I don't have an answer for this question. I don't have an answer for this question, but I think primarily we have to know our target audience. I think this is the first thing we should do. It's a matter of I don't know. It's very difficult to have a dialogue if it's only one person that is speaking. So I think it's the first thing is get to know your audience. So then there is another model, the contextual model, because there were many criticisms on this model, of course. And then the contextual model, it's basically the same one as this, but then there is the understanding that the public will, it's not that the public doesn't know, the lay people, they don't know. It's not that. It's just because they respond according to the circumstances. For instance, one thing is, like 10 years ago, if 10 years ago we started to tell people to be careful with Zika virus, no one would be worried with this, because Zika virus was not common in Brazil. There was no problem with Zika virus. But currently, if I tell you, like, you should be careful, huh? Then people will respond differently. It's not that people don't know or don't understand. It's just because, depending on the context, people will respond differently. So, but then there were many criticisms on the contextual model, because they started to use marketing strategies. And then they were accused to use marketing strategies and still to manipulate people, because if you know how people and when people will respond, you can also manipulate people, because you just wait and then you provide the information. Probably what I'm telling you, it doesn't make a lot of sense for astronomy, because we are studying things that are very far away from people's daily lives. But if we are talking about health issues, let's take the example of vaccination nowadays. So it's like really an issue, right? We need people to understand that vaccination is important. We really do. And then, like, there were other proposed models, like the public engagement with science. This was it became very common in the UK. So to bring the community so that they can think together with the scientists how to communicate this science, the important aspects of science that society should know. But it's not that the public will take hands and the lay public will communicate, but they will take part of the decisions. But this is really difficult to implement, and it's very expensive. And for instance, many museums try to do that in the UK. Like, they were inviting people to come to their museums and let the visitors decide on the exhibitions, on the topics to be discussed. And there was one problem, that museum visitors, they are highly educated, and in Brazil as well. So in practice, basically the museum visitors are people that maybe you visit the Museum of Astronomy and Related Science, you like astronomy. Maybe you are not an astronomer, but maybe you are a PhD on medical sciences, you know? So like the same people were like taking the decisions. They could not really engage like people that were very away from science. And there is also the method of lay expertise, and this is really sophisticated and also complicated to implement, because then it starts from the fact that the lay public has knowledge, and we build the information we want from this knowledge. But then, actually, this is true. I'm very much in favor of acknowledging the knowledge, for instance, that traditional communities have, but sometimes what we want to communicate, it doesn't pass through to this direction, right? I'm very sure that our indigenous groups, they have knowledge on agriculture, medicine, but sometimes what I want to communicate, it doesn't have to do with this, so it's difficult actually to connect depending what I want to communicate. So it's difficult to implement. So these are the most often communication models. And so there is no answer to your question, like how I do to avoid. But it's very important to have interaction and also try and remember that people are not empty containers. They know things. And when we start to communicate from what people know, there are many studies that show that the learning process can be higher and faster. So with all this, like we are trying to organize all these concepts and this new field, how is the things within the IAU? Like because it's easy to understand these issues when we are talking about health communication, but what about astronomy? Like, do we have this kind of questions and issues within astronomy? And actually we do have, no, right? We do have. I can give you some examples later. So within the IAU, there is this division C for education, outreach, and heritage. So you see that there is no, it's not said science communication, it is outreach. So like these confusions are still in place. But within this division, we have the commissions. So there is the division C, and then within the division C there are 4 commissions: astronomy, education and development, communicating astronomy with the public, history of astronomy, world heritage and astronomy. And within the astronomy, education and development, there are currently all these working groups. So astronomy education resources, astronomy for equity and inclusion, network for astronomy school education, achieving sustainable development within quality, lightning framework, archaeoastronomy and astronomy in culture. Let's remember what I said of the lay communication model. I think this is important. Education and training in astrobiology and ethnoastronomy and intangible astronomical heritage. So these working groups, they change, right? It's not like depending, I don't know very well how I works, but I think every, I don't know how many years they change, the president and the working groups also change. And within the communication, communicating astronomy with the public, they are responsible for organizing this conference, the CAP conference, every year. I think it's every year or every 2 years. No, I don't remember. I think it's every year. Last year was in Japan. No, every 2 years, sorry. Last year was in Japan. I think you presented, Thiago presented a talk there and also a poster. But why I'm saying this to you, because if you are running science communication projects, you might have a look the projects that were also presented in this conference, or even the proceedings, right? But IU also has the offices, and it's a bit of a mess. Like we don't know where to go for information. It's a bit of a mess. There are the commissions, but there are also the offices. But why I think this information is important for you? Because they have calls, so you can get money. So if you're running a science communication project, you every year the Office of Astronomy for Development has an annual call. So you might apply for the call and get money for your project. And then there are 4 offices. There is the Office of Astronomy and Outreach in Japan. So this is in Japan, and they are responsible for the communicating astronomy with the public journal. There is the conference and there is the journal. So the journal is also really nice if you want to learn about other astronomy outreach projects. And sometimes they even have assessment. They have publications of projects that were evaluated, and this is like really nice. So there is also the Office for Young Astronomers and the Office of Astronomy for Development in South Africa. And this is a bit of, the topics are a bit mixed. We cannot avoid it. Because if we are talking about development, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit, then we have to talk about education, of course. We cannot talk about development with, like, excluding education. And there will be a new Office of Education, but I think IAU has not, so far they didn't say where it's going to be based. And just a parenthesis, within the Astronomy for Development in South Africa, there are regional offices, and there is the Portuguese Language Expertise Center that Alan mentioned before, that we are coordinating here in Brazil. So this is really a parenthesis, right? It's not about science communication, but I also think that, since I mentioned public policies, I think this is really important for you to know. So this chart, actually, well, the Millennium Goals, I don't know if you heard about the Millennium Goals in the past. They were, there was one of conventions from the United Nations, and all the nations that are part of the United Nations signed 8 goals for 2015. And those 8 goals, if I remember correctly, they were about education, they were about promoting gender equality, extinct hunger, and all the nations, they signed, and the idea was that all those 8 topics would be like totally transformed by 2015. But that did not happen, right? So we still have people that do not have what to eat. There are like many issues happening with our planet. So they changed the 8 Millennium Goals for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the idea is that by 2030, all these things will be eradicated. So all the nations signed this, and this is forcing the countries also to take actions through public policies. And what I'm telling you this, because now you'll see that the National Week in Brazil, Semana Nacional de Ciência e Tecnologia, and many calls from CNPq, FAPERJ, and so on, you'll see that they will always, always, always put a note saying that the project, it doesn't matter it's a science project or social science project, the project has to address one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So I think this is something that we should all know, because by 2030, we have to be living in a better world, right? We'll not have gender problems, we'll not have people, starving in streets, so we all have to do our parts, right? Okay, so there is an Office for Astronomy for Development in South Africa, and there are the calls, the annual calls, and within the calls, they can help both education projects, but also if you have ideas as to use astronomy for local development, they also accept proposals of this kind of projects. So for instance, right, there is one project that is, let's see, here, goal number 9. So it's industry, no, I cannot read, it's the orange one. To help build infrastructure. So they were trying to foment projects that have to do with astrotourism, to bring tourism development. Or the goal number 5, that is gender equity. Also, there are many projects that are being implemented, trying to to bring more girls to not only to astronomy but science in general, and so on. So I think this is important for you to know, because of course quality education is also one of the Millennium Goals, and you can do science communication through education. So Alan and I are coordinating the Portuguese language center here in Brazil. So it's a collaboration of all Portuguese-speaking countries, and we are considering astronomy for development activities in all Portuguese-speaking countries. And then we recently wrote a comment to Nature Astronomy about the first actions that we took. So we already did many activities here in Brazil, but also in Cape Verde. Príncipe Island activities will be taking place next week, Mozambique. We even helped to form the first Cape Verdean student. So it's the first person to become an astronomer in Cape Verde. So this was also in collaboration with us. So we sent this comment to Nature Astronomy, and it was published like 2 months ago. But okay, what I was talking about IAU. So, but it's also important to know outside of astronomy, so science communication in general. So I just wanted to give you some aspects and some networks that maybe it's good for you to remember they exist, because there are calls, there are articles, there are many people working with this. So I think the HedgePop is one that you should know, because there is this network for institutions in Latin America and Caribbean. So they have books, they have, there are conferences every 3 years, as far as I know. So this is really nice to go and exchange with other people from other countries of Latin America. There is also this other network that is public communication of science and technology. So this is really huge. They also host conference every 3 years. Some journals, I wanted to mention some journals where you can actually find research on science communication. There are many more, but I think these are the most important. There is the JCOM, Journal of Science Communication. There is the CAP, of course, from IAU, Communicating Astronomy with the Public. There is PUS, Public Understanding of Science. I put one Brazilian, Releia, Revista Latino-Americana de Educação em Astronomia. This is more for education, formal and non-formal education. Some groups that are working, but it's not like it's not very common, even within universities, to have groups working on science communication, because this is still a growing field. But in Museu da Vida, Fiocruz, there is one large group, and this is also where the master is taking place. There is one in Italy, very strong group that is called CISA. I think they also have masters and PhD on physics and astrophysics, but they have a very strong program on science communication as well. And in Leiden, maybe many of you know Pedro Russo. Pedro Russo is the leader of the Astronomy and Society group, so they are also doing very interesting things. So I did a print of this JCOM journal, just for you to have a look of what kind of topics of research they are publishing on, just for you to have an idea. So this paper, these are all from 2017. Communicating complex and evolving astronomical data. Narrative as an evaluative approach for citizen science project. Prototyping an RRI exhibit at a science museum. I don't know what RI is. Is humor good in popular science article? So I think this is like really interesting. That's why I'm telling you, because I think you can learn a lot. Discussing climate change online, topics and perceptions in online climate change communication and different online public arenas. Then there are the most read articles ever from the journal. What is science communication? The ethics of science communication. and so on and so on, okay? So I'm almost done. Okay. Okay, so is there anyone that is not Brazilian? Everyone is Brazilian here in the room, okay? Okay, right. Because the examples I'm going to give now, they are all most from Brazil. Okay. So we have many challenges, right? There is a study that is conducted by the Ministry of Science and Technology that is the public perception of science. So this is nothing new. There are many countries that run this study, public perception of science. And it's a longitudinal study. This means that they do this study every, I think, 4 or 5 years, they take the survey again. And I recommend that you go to the website and you check the type of questions they ask and what we can learn from our population. So one result is that in Brazil there is a really low consumption of information. So just like people simply don't buy, you know, even I'm not saying about go and buy a magazine, but people, I mean, they prefer to do other things for entertainment, right? And for me, a critical result of this survey is that Brazilians don't recognize their science institutions and scientists. So there is one question that is asked: can you name a Brazilian scientist? And 3% of people can name Brazilian scientists, and it's Oswaldo Cruz and Einstein. So Einstein is also a Brazilian scientist. So this is a problem. Of course, this is a problem. Citizens have little participation in discussions and decisions in the field of science. So they also feel ignored because they are not heard. And in Brazil we have a weak scientific culture because there is also a question that asks, have you ever been to a museum or to a zoo, aquarium, whatever, in this last year? And only 20% of people actually, they go yearly to science centers, for instance. But however, it's not that bad, because they don't go. They say that they don't go because they don't have access to. Actually, the majority of the population in Brazil, they claim interest in science, but they don't know how to get informed or how to have access, like, to science in general. Well, we have to say that our science journalism is really poor, unfortunately. There are very few journalism communication schools that actually have the subject of science journalism. So this is a current problem that journalists, that even those journalists that they want to write about science, they say, oh, but I didn't have any information on that. And there is one problem that is called the Sagan effect. Have you ever heard about this Sagan effect? So I explain. So even though Carl Sagan was a prominent science communicator and an excellent scientist, when he started doing science communication, his colleagues didn't pay attention that much, or they didn't like. So that was named as Sagan effect. So there is, when people are within their departments, if they decide stopping doing research on astrophysics and dedicate their time to science communication or education, normally this is not appreciated by their peers. And this is called the Sagan effect. It's like, that guy that is doing that things. You know, so there was actually one commission of IAU that was working on the professionalization and accreditation of science communicators. But actually, I think the working group is not running anymore, and I don't know what they did actually, because we still have the same problem. So it's actually important, right, for the professionals that want to dedicate the time for science communication, that they are also not depreciated by the peers. Well, but we also have many opportunities. So, when we asked people who likes to observe the sky, I'm not going to ask this to you because I know you probably like to observe the sky. But for instance, in the museum, we run a study about this. And the responses are like really fantastic, really, really fantastic. This I translated from Portuguese to English. I can read also in Portuguese if you want, but now it's already translated. So like one visitor said, it's a unique and fantastic experience, unforgettable. Look at the universe is a mystery, isn't it? I could not have lived this life without it. So this is a visitor, a study that we run for a year long. And well, so if people like to observe the sky, who likes to share the knowledge about the sky? And then there is this study from Marta Entradas and Bauer saying that astronomers have an outsized passion for outreach. This is different among other communities, okay? So this happens only in astronomy. And she conducted a study actually with the members from the IAU. And she got many replies and she analyzed that survey. And she found from the responses that astronomers have intrinsic motivation to share astronomy with the public. And you have to realize that the motivation can be intrinsic or extrinsic. For instance, if I get money to do something, it's extrinsic motivation, right? But if I do because I want, then it's intrinsic motivation. So she found that astronomers have intrinsic motivation for science communication that is driven by something that comes from inside you, enjoyment, or a sense of responsibility or duty. And she has conducted this study among other communities and she didn't find the same. So if people like to observe the sky and if we like to share the sky, so astronomy has a good opportunity. And of course, we say that astronomy is one of the oldest sciences. And because of that, we have many aspects, and this was the second key lesson I wanted you to bring home. That is the following. Okay, although we are scientists, and although we want to communicate the science of the black hole, the gravitational lensing, and the atmospheres of stars, there is something very special about astronomy. That astronomy has other dimensions, and sometimes we can capture the attention to science and astronomy because of these other dimensions that astronomy has. For instance, well, of course, social in the sense that we can use the astronomy for development, for bringing new engineers and to bring young people to scientific careers. This is like the basics, of course. But astronomy, because we deal with mathematics, physics, chemistry, this can also be used as to improve science education in general, because astronomy is not a subject in school curriculum, so it's not there. But there is also the philosophical dimension, and it's very good for critical reasoning. It's very, I think, it's very rare to find a person that has never asked about the origin of the universe. You know, people want to know, and what did you have before of the Big Bang? People, they do ask these questions. And then, of course, like the images of astronomy are like beautiful. So astronomy is also very nice. Also has an aesthetic dimension. So this is also a positive point. And of course, culture. Because many groups of people around the world use astronomy for time measuring or agricultural purposes. So we see cultural elements of astronomy in many cultures. So this is also something that we can bring to our discussions with people. And also emotional, Because astronomy is also nice for leisure. People like to observe the sky and think about nothing. So I think we have to take opportunity of these advantages of astronomy. So some final remarks. So I think it's really possible to disseminate science with both educational and communication aspects. Like we put all these within the same basket and we call science communication, or in Portuguese, divulgação da ciência. But it's really important to know that there are it involves different skills. One thing is to write a press release about something we have just discovered. Another thing is to go to a school and promote activities within the school system. And then I think we need to know our target audience, right? It's also necessary to understand, well, this I already said, and it's important to accept that in a few minutes of contact with the public, it will be very difficult to teach concepts. So perhaps the most important thing that our activities can do is to arouse interest and motivation in people, right? And I think that's it. So I'll take questions.
Thank you so much for this very nice talk. So questions are open.
Hi. Do you think that when we that are scientists, we should approach as scientists when we do science communication? Like if we say, oh, we are scientists, so believe in us, or something like that.
Okay, right. Well, scientists are seen as arrogant to society. And this is not an opinion, right? There are many studies, social studies of science, that see, like the society in general, see scientists like this. So I think this is very, very important for us to control this when we go to talk to people, right? It's difficult because of course we are in a very privileged aspect of society because we have studied a lot. Mm-hmm. So we have to take this into account. We have to be careful. But on the other hand, for instance, this public perception of science survey, in Brazil at least, when it was asked to people who they trust, journalists and scientists were at the top of the list, and politicians at the bottom. Well, this survey was, I think the last survey was from 2014, I think. And I know that a new study will be launched now in July at SBPC. And maybe this has changed because now we are living odd times and fake news are everywhere. So probably journalists are not at the top anymore. So people will still trust on scientists. But I think what we have to try to avoid is this monological approach. And it's tiring sometimes, but if we go and use the dialogue, then of course I think we can achieve the goal of a better communication.
Any other question?
So, in science we have many enemies, specifically in astronomy, the Flat Earth Society. So how can we reach people that don't want to hear us, don't trust us in any way?
I think we will not reach them. I really do. I mean, this is a very new problem, right? I was reading Carl Sagan's book these days because I was doing resenha of the book, and it was the Pale Blue Dot was written 25 years ago, and there was a paragraph that Carl Sagan was saying, the Earth is round. So and it's funny that 25 years ago that was not a problem, and today it's a problem to say that the Earth is round. But one thing is for sure, these people like flat Earth believers, they are not everyone. I mean, they do a lot of noise, but you know, and they are on the internet, and they have their robots, like to boost their posts. But you know, people try to ask, with people in general, they don't think that the Earth is flat. You know, they think that this is very stupid, actually. So, I sometimes think that when we contest these people, because these are the ones that they don't want to hear. It's a matter of faith. So it's going to be very difficult to discuss. They don't want the dialogue. But if we don't want to, that's a problem. So I think we have to be the smart ones and try to dialogue with society in general, and not simply say, no, come on, of course the Earth is not flat. This is obvious. I mean, I think we should always try to avoid this approach. And there is something that I think this is really important for this audience, that in Brazil, the syncretism is really strong. So Brazilians can go to the Catholic Church and jump 7 waves in New Year's and wear white, and this is no problem, you know? People can believe in many things at the same time, and even in science, So I think, and horoscope as well, right? So I think in this sense, we have to be patient with this, because sometimes even if people believe in horoscope, it doesn't mean that they don't believe in scientific method. They do sometimes, but for them it's people can split things in a strange way. So this is not like this in Europe, right? In Brazil it is like this. So I think sometimes we have to be patient, because if we start saying, oh no, come on, you like astrology, I'm not going to talk with you because this is ridiculous, then of course there is no dialogue, and then of course we'll not do anything. But yeah, so we have to be patient sometimes, and sometimes I think there is no way of dialoguing because the channel is blocked.
I have a question. It's for me, Carl Sagan is inspiring, but how can I inspire someone else if they are not me? How can I make them feel like I feel with, I don't know, astronomy or science in a way?
Well, I do have some tips, and I think, we tend to think that science is neutral. This is a very common belief of scientists from the hard fields, that science is neutral and nothing affects science. And normally when people are, I don't know, talking about astronomy or everything, skipping all the social aspects of science. Let's go and speak about protons and electrons and how they accelerate and travel in the universe. But I think we can gain better results when we put science in context, when we explain how the discoveries took place, that this is not very linear, there are no geniuses, and when we speak as humans, that's the reason why I introduced myself to you, and I think this changes a lot. If you approach as a human person and not someone super smart that has a PhD, you know, so normally you get better results when you discuss these social aspects of science, the history of science. I think we have better results. I think actually what Sagan did, like, he did a lot of this, right?
Hi, hello. So I have a slightly different and somewhat tricky question. How do we convince Congress that to maintain scientific funding? So I can say how the United States, and it's quite unconventionally, but I don't think it's applied to the United States. I'm not sure if you know, the way science convinced astronomy to be hot is by merging astronomy and defense, you know, and physics and defense. So the fact that we won the World War two atomic bombs impacted Congress a lot. There is a chain of national labs there where physics can do whatever they want in peace times, but they promise American government to change their research to weapons in case of war. There's another example that I like is that WFIRST, the actual telescope, was donated by the NRO, the National Recognized Agency. It was a spy satellite. They have 2 extra spy satellites, and they donate one to us, and that became WFIRST. So we have this argument to Congress that the same satellites that we use to space can use to North Korea. And the third one, which is that a foreign science that is the United States is a foreign science that is not helping their own country. Because I'm United States, I'm not helping Brazil. And for them, this is gold, because it means that they have the leverage. Here, it's harder to get some of these arguments. So how do we convince Congress that no matter what, they should keep science funding?
Now, this is a very good question and a tricky one. I don't know if I have an answer, because we can speak about science communication to different audiences, and there are people that actually study this, like how do you have science communication for politicians, right? Because well, this is like, I think in Brazil we are not prepared for that, you know? Like now that science is really dangerous in Brazil, people are like really going to the streets, and everyone is doing outreach, like to show to society that universities, we do like study and research. It's not like a mess. But I think we are not prepared for that. Well, actually, well, the president of the SBPC, Ildeu Moreira, he's doing this a lot. He's going to Congress a lot. But I actually think that we do not have like strategies for this. What I can say, like, since I work in an research unit of the Ministry of Science and Technology, and the way the Ministry of Science and Technology sees the museum, it really sees as the agency that will experiment things in science communication. So, like, we receive many projects sometimes to evaluate, and even the National Science Week for a certain period of time was developed within the museum and so on. So, like, we have like a very open dialogue to the Ministry of Science and Technology, and what I can say is that it is a mess. It is really a mess. Like, every time, like, how many ministries of science and technology we have recently? Like, I don't know, I think like 7 or and every time there is a change in ministry, they change the whole structure. So this I think we don't have like state program for science in Brazil, and sometimes not even within the same party. Like, because, like, for instance, for Lula and Dilma, this already changed a lot, you know. Sometimes there is not continuity even within the same party. So I don't have an answer to this question, but I think we still we have to keep doing pressure, because we are living like really odd times, and if society doesn't recognize their scientific institutions, so we are like really trouble. No, but I think this government also in Brazil, they are also very, they are looking at the defense strategies as well. This is also because they are again dealing with Alcântara launching center. And also, like the minister, he is a cosmonaut, astronaut. So he's also looking, but I think we don't have strategies for this here in Brazil. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Well, but on the other hand, the public perception by Americans after the World War II has changed a lot because the surveys before that showed that people liked science, they believed science, they believed that scientists were good people, and after the bombs, the public perception changed a lot, and now they associate a lot with with bad and evil, and we don't trust scientists because science can do horrible things as well. So, you know, these things change, like.
Wow, so many things. Perhaps I would start with this one, like following the same line. And there is a way of saying this, that Brazil has not a plan in terms of science. So it doesn't matter if it's the Labour Party or any other. The point is, if you don't have a plan, what do you want to achieve with time? We don't know. I think that we never had these kind of things. And this is why it's so hard to decide the way you are going to do something, because, you know, we're not looking over there to see the future. Well, the other thing is that for Brazilians in general, or politicians, I think they see Brazil like we have this syndrome of, what is the name of this? Is vira-lata? Vira-lata? Yeah. So science is something that the smart people do. And for most of the Brazilians who are not smart enough to do something in science that would make difference for us in terms of the security of the country, or, you know, development or whatever. So this is why it's hard to recognize the Brazilian science as someone that it's giving important contributions to the society in general. So if you go to biology, perhaps people would understand this, because you were worrying about the diseases you have here and perhaps you don't have in any other place. But when you talk about science, I mean, these hard fields like the one you are, you know, people never remember us. And you see in the newspapers that they are using only NASA's results. So when you try to say these kind of things using the results you get here, people do not pay attention. And this is again because of this vira-lata syndrome, no? So, well, this is one thing that trying to, in my opinion, to relate these two things. So when you go outside of Brazil saying that you are scientists, well, people are, wow, very nice. But one part of this is because they are also not expecting that poor people developed countries are, you know, producing good scientists. So it's kind of, oh, you're Brazilian and you do this? I'm sure you face this kind of problem. Yeah. Yeah, we don't know. And I think that in this particular case, Lula was worrying about this while putting money in science at the very beginning. He was arguing in this way. But then I don't know what happened with those ideas.
Yeah. Actually, even science communication policies, like we see an increasing of calls, like with Lula and Dilma, like science centers. I think we jumped from 100 something all over Brazil to 500 something. So there were not like museums, planetarium in Central West, and there was a huge expansion, and many science centers were built, and planetariums, and yeah, now they don't have money just like to survive, right? So. Yeah.
So I'll change a little bit because this is, well, there are lots of things you can keep discussing. You should do this after here. But then I have another question that, well, one question, in fact, this was a comment, no? That it's a long one, I know, about what you said, that if you come to a place and perhaps you say that I am a scientist, and this kind of hierarchical way you tend to do this in a place that the number of people with PhD is so low, this makes harder, no, to give our, you know, whatever you want to do in terms of communicating science. But then my question is, I see a number of times exactly the opposite thing, that as people are not expecting women, black people, young people, or poor people, all of these, they, you know, hold a PhD, it's get a kind of example. So they try to, oh God, you are normal people like me, and you studied all these number of years, so perhaps what you have to say, it's something that you understand, because you have a natural connection. So don't you think that this works as well?
Yeah, well, I think this is a different thing. It's the role model problem. I think it's very often that we do not have models to look at. Like, for instance, if Brazilians cannot recognize a scientist, so how, like, children, they will like want to become a scientist if they don't know any? So I think then there is this of the role models, and I think if we talk about minorities, it's really, really important that women scientists and black scientists and LGBT scientists, they show up and they say, look, I'm here, because they are from the minorities and they will play a role as models. I think this is, we have to show up. But sometimes people have suffered so many in their careers that they just want to be discreet and like go there, do their presentation, whatever, don't want to talk about like personal issues, and that I understand. But I think, yes, I think we are also playing a role, or even you, if you go back to your hometown, and sometimes you're the only astronomer in your whole hometown. I think this is like, even this, I mean, maybe you're not minority group, but if you go there and you do a public talk, you know, like in your hometown, you're going to act as a model. Of course, I don't see that people will see you as arrogant. When I'm saying that in general we are perceived as arrogant, I'm not saying this like face-to-face conversation, you know, because normally if people come to listen to you, it's because they want. But I'm saying like more like in general, you know. I can give you an example. Here in Brazil, we don't, I mean, the vaccination is becoming a problem, but it's not that hard. But for instance, like sunblock and repellent. Like, should I use the repellent? Put the repellent and then the sunblock, or the opposite? Or if I use both, or if I'm 10 hours with the repellent, then I'm going to get ill and allergies. So like, even though we are PhDs on astrophysics, but I don't know if what I have to use, if the repellent or the sunblock. You know, and then sometimes people just get like stressed, like, oh, scientists, they don't, you know, they don't, exactly. You know, people don't have patience. So I think there are like, I think face-to-face meetings is like one thing, but there is also the general perception that we have to take into account, like.
Well, it's a simple question, but I think it's quite difficult to answer. We all know there is so many issues to solve concerning the spread of science, the effective way to communicate science, but also there is a huge problem inside the house. So how to avoid Sagan effect?
Yeah, I think things are changing. I really do. But I think it's going to take time, you know. Well, when we have like room in our CV to put our science communication activities, when there are grants, like now that science communication is an area, so I can have grant Bolsa Produtividade for being a practitioner and an academic of science communication. So I think all these things, they are very important, and perhaps that's why it's changing. And I think, again, I'll go back to the policies, you know. I think we can do many as individuals, but when things come from above, it changes totally. And even though we have changed government, I think the National Science Week, it's going to be a program that will be maintained. And I think it's really changing. Like, to have that universities are obliged to open the doors or to celebrate the National Science Week. I think this is changing because it's kind of oblige people to go out of the observatory or the laboratory and go and speak with the public. So I think it's in the process, but it's going to take some time still.
Sorry, I'll give it to you in a minute. I wonder if, well, it was for me or no? Okay, sorry, I wonder if, well, I'm not too much a follower of YouTube and all of these things, but I heard about that a number of people are doing well, I don't know if the right way of saying science education, perhaps through media, and not necessarily knowing deeply what they're talking about. What's your impression about this nowadays, that social media, all of this is the way of doing everything?
I think this is really an issue. I think also Sabi is so concerned that there is this stamp. So the Social Astronomical Society is kind of distributing these stamps for channels and blogs, whatever, that have their content, content-wise, they are okay, fine, right? Because it's difficult. I think sometimes I receive many emails, maybe because I'm at the museum and my email is open, but oftentimes I receive people that, look at my channel or the blog I wrote, and there are two types: those that are totally crazy theories. I think this happens to you probably as well. But there are sometimes people that are really putting an effort, but the content is not good, and it's a pity actually. But then I think in Brazil we are doing this, but I think it's the same with everything, you know, like fake news. We have to be sure of our sources, because I think there is no nothing to say more about this.
Last week in Brazil, we had the university going to the streets to show the population our researchers. But I think that we didn't use the correct language. We didn't approach the population with the correct form. Do you think that we had to change this? Don't do this only in this occasion, but all the time, every month, every day. We had to show our researchers to the population with the correct approach, because the population don't believe us.
Yeah, well, it's hard to have an opinion formed. Yeah, I think the demonstrations, they are demonstrations, you know?
It's very important to go to the street to show this, but we didn't use the correct language. People were with posters, but it always had the scientific language, difficult terms. People working the street don't know this language, don't know these words. We have to use the correct approach.
Yeah, I kind of agree, but since we are like living crazy times, I think every effort is valid at the moment. But I tend to agree that the demonstrations are to demonstrate, like, you know, and like maybe it's not the place to do the science outreach or communication or education. Maybe it's not the moment. I remember that last year we had a demonstration, Marcha da Ciência, and the museum wanted the grantees to go there and do science outreach activities during the Marcha, Science March. And then like people were saying like, oh, come on, but I wanted to go there and scream, and now I have to do like experiments and so on. So I think there is also this, you know, like you go to the demonstration, maybe in that very moment you don't want to be the communicator, you want to protest, right?
It was a desperate thing.
Exactly.
But
so
we should do this normally.
I think we should do more frequently, and but at the moment we live, I think even within the demonstrations, it's okay.
It's pretty valid.
Yes. Well, I actually don't know, but that's very good that we end with this question. And what I wanted to say is that we have to embrace our colleagues and like throw away this sort of wording, because I have already seen colleagues, physics colleagues saying that, okay, so you're going to the museum, so but they don't do science, right? They just do like outreach. No, there is like the research on science education and the history of science, but this is not like real science. I mean, like real science, you know. So I've heard this from many colleagues from STEM. So I really think that we have to skip this language and even within the sciences there are like this, you know, prejudices. So I don't know where does it come from in our politicians, but what I have to say is that we should not ever like repeat this and say the same, because yeah, and no, and I totally agree with you, because now that I work with social scientists, we have also a mathematician, because they like really use like very like models like to understand motivation, intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, learning. Like, I mean, there are like statistics, like very heavy mathematics and statistics behind this. So I think this is also like a lesson for us, like not to repeat this.
Well, just to finish, I'd like to say that we all agree that we need a new culture. No? We need to change the curricula at universities. We don't expect that all undergrad students go to the same graduate, you know, like we have to do the same thing that the supervisor did. We also need to change the way of teaching at university and put the outreach and science communication as also a potential for research. And we need people working at museums, at planetariums, science communication as part of the professional realization. No? So I think we need to change that. We need to change the basic education. We need to change, I think we have to change the culture. No? So it's all about the culture, this scientific culture that you comment in the beginning of your talk. So. Yeah. Exactly. This is we need to change this. So it's part of the culture. So. Well, people, so it's really exciting, but we have to finish. So thank you so much, Patrícia, for your very nice talk. And see you all tomorrow.